Hello, and welcome to Micro-Histories. I'm your host, Jason Bischoff-Wurstle with the New Haven Museum. And today, we're standing on the newly refurbished Grand Avenue Bridge in Fairhaven. We're going to talk a little bit today about the founding of Fairhaven as a small but worldly oyster and fishing village. Fairhaven was established as a small village independent of New Haven, but dates back to the New Haven colony establishment in 1638. And even before that, it was known by native tribes to be abundant naturally with what became its world famous export, the oyster. In fact, the Quinnipiac native tribes would establish their seasonal village just above the banks of the Quinnipiac, rather than downtown or the 9 squares. But for our purposes today, in talking about the founding of how this became known as Fairhaven, it begins really with this bridge, or rather, the first bridge that was here on this spot, the Dragon Bridge, which opened in 1791. Prior to that, a man named Heman Hotchkiss, who had grown up in East Haven, which the Heights were East Haven, and this was the Neck. And he bought land both on East Grand and shored up the wharfs and shored up businesses, establishing that as a set place, and he bought land at the intersection of what was to be Grand and Front, thus putting a center to what would become a small, tight-knit, but again, world-known village. So, let's take a walk through the roots of the old village of Fairhaven. The village of Fairhaven was not always known as Fairhaven. In fact, its first name was colloquially known as Dragon, or the Village of Dragon, or Dragon Point. And that was named for the seals that the early captains would hear on the river, similar to Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, that would carry on and it would echo through the riverside like a dragon hidden amongst the waters. At the time that Heman Hotchkiss bought land on both sides of the Dragon Bridge, the village was known as Dragon, but by 1836, when Hotchkiss passed away, the village was known at that point, documented as the village of Fairhaven, whose wharves and shipbuilding areas up and down the banks of the Quinnipiac built crafts that sailed the ocean blue worldwide at that point. By 1816, the small village of Dragon was firmly established. Heman Hotchkiss had married into the Rowe family. He had married Elizabeth Rowe. The Rowe family continued to be important and integral to both Dragon and its later incarnation as Fairhaven. And even dating well into the 19th and early 20th centuries, H.C. Rowe revolutionized the industry of oystering, spreading the name Fairhaven around the world as the oyster capital. By 1816, the building behind me, known as King's Block, had been constructed and was established early as a coffee house and a tavern and hotel. This building was central to the village that grew up around it. And there's been a story or two of Yale students making it all the way over here to the banks of the Quinnipiac to truly see how the other half lived. The hotel and tavern that was located here in King's Block was at the intersection of what today is Grand Ave and Front Street. Front Street is known as the oldest continuous road in all of New Haven, originally starting as a Native American thoroughway prior to the colonial establishment. No New England small village would be complete without a cemetery. And here we're standing in the Fairhaven Union Cemetery. The small village cemetery dates back to 1803 on land donated by the Rowe family and the Granis family. The land was not just intended to be a cemetery, it was also donated for the use of a meeting house and a school and parade grounds. Meaning this was the equivalent of the New Haven Green for the small village of Fairhaven in the early 19th century. The Union Cemetery is located behind the former Grand Ave Congregational Church. In the mid-19th century, the spire of the church was the tallest man-made structure in the entire state of Connecticut. Imagine that. This was the equivalent of the World Trade Center or Freedom Tower or Sears Tower or what have you. This tallest man-made structure in the entire state. And it was a beacon to the sea captains making their way back home to their village of Fairhaven, where many of those captains and their families are buried in this cemetery, tying this cemetery to New Haven's long and rich history and a direct beacon back from there. And it is here that Heman Hotchkiss, the founder of Fairhaven, is buried with his family and generations after in what was known as God's Acre. And for the New Haven Museum, I'm your host, Jason Bischoff-Wurstle. This has been Micro-Histories. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Keep following us at the New Haven Museum YouTube channel. And special thanks to our friends at the New Haven Free Public Library, whose Fairhaven branch is right across the street here, for hosting us in their downtown lobby at the Ives branch with a special poster series based on Micro-Histories. So stay tuned. Let us know what you want to see and what else you'd love to know about in Fairhaven or elsewhere in New Haven. Thanks a lot. Keep it tuned.